Thank you, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming out this evening to listen to me as I talk to you about Australia-Myanmar relations, past, present and future. You might be wondering why the Australian ambassador would want to be talking about the past. After all, Myanmar's past has, certainly the recent past, has been a very sad history. In most of the period after World War II, it was a period of deterioration of the political, the social and economic conditions within the country, and also a deterioration in the country's relations with most of the rest of the world. The reason for talking at least a little bit about the past is that some understanding of Australia's relations with Myanmar over this period is interesting. It is interesting partly because Australia's approach was different in some important respects from that of other so-called Western countries, and partly also because there are continuities which extend through to today. So let me talk a little bit about the past. If we go back to the colonial era, Australia and what was then Burma had very little actually to do with each other. Australians probably thought of Burma as part of the British Empire, and if they thought further about it, they would have regarded it, as some still do, as maybe a distant and exotic, unknown land of pagodas, elephants, umbrellas, palm trees. The few business people that made it here were involved in mining, as many Australians still are in Myanmar, and also in horse racing. There were strong ties between the horse racing industry in Australia and that in Myanmar. But that has long since fallen out. An Australian trade delegation came to Burma in the 1930s. But the low price of rice at the time, which was Burma's biggest export, had depressed market conditions, and the assessment was both short and unfavourable. The Second World War dramatically changed the place of Burma in Australia's consciousness. As the Imperial Japanese Army marched through and conquered the country in late 1941 and early 1942. By May of 1942, Japan had conquered Singapore, and some 3,000 Australian soldiers were sent from there to the south of Burma, and they were put to work building the Thai-Burma Railway, a project that has come to be known infamously as the Death Railway. In total, nearly 5,000 Australians were put to work on the project, and of those, 1,335 died. In fighting to retake Burma, some 7,500 Australians from all three services were involved. Those among them who fell now lie in Rangoon War Cemetery, in Kok Chiang War Cemetery just outside of Yangon, and also in Fambusiat down in near Mawlamyine. After the war, the Second World War, government ties expanded slowly. The first official delegation from Burma visited Australia in 1946, that came from Burma's parliament. In 1952, Australia established what was called a delegation to Burma, and then full ambassadors were exchanged from 1956 onwards, and have remained here in an unbroken period ever since. Between 1962 and 1988, our relations with Burma were necessarily constrained. Ne Win's coup, the emergence of the Burmese path of socialism, economic autarky, leading to dictatorship with gross abuses of human rights, all these things limited Australia's interests in the country and also limited the degree to which we could engage with Myanmar. The events of 1988 and of 1990, where the results of elections were overturned and many in the opposition were imprisoned, prevented growth in relations between our countries. Australia supported democracy for the people of Myanmar then, as it does today. When some countries were introducing punitive sanctions, we saw the need to stay involved, as well as to push for change. And it is this outlook that has consistently characterized Australia's approach to Myanmar. we believed engagement was more likely than isolation to contribute to reform. We believed that the people of Myanmar should not be punished because of the government they had. Alexander Downer, who was Australia's Foreign Minister from 1996 until 2007, met his Myanmar counterparts reasonably regularly at ASEAN Plus ministerial meetings between 1996 and 2007. In 1999, he showed political courage and an innovative approach by launching Australian engagement initiatives with Myanmar in the fields of human rights, police-to-police training, and, in 2002, agricultural research collaboration. These initiatives, each successful in their own way, still continue today. Australia did not disengage. Australia did not withdraw its ambassador, as others did, and we never imposed the range of punitive economic sanctions that other Western countries chose to. We did have autonomous travel and financial restrictions against individuals and the military, but never against the long-suffering people of Myanmar. In 2012, and in response to democratic reforms initiated by the government of Thein Sein, we lifted our targeted financial and travel sanctions, though we still retain our arms embargo. So this takes us to where we are today. Last year, Australia released a new foreign policy white paper. It states upfront that no long-term foreign policy objective is more important to Australia than ensuring our region evolves peacefully and without an erosion of the fundamental principles on which the Indo-Pacific region's prosperity and cooperative relations are based. It states further that the Australian government will ensure Australia remains a leading economic, development and strategic partner for ASEAN and its members. Australia places a high priority on our relationships in Southeast Asia and our support for ASEAN. Australia has an interest in seeking to build a regional economic and strategic culture that supports stability, cooperation, the rule of law, and openness. We believe that a stronger, freer, more democratic, more just, more prosperous, and more active Myanmar is in the best interests of Myanmar and in the region. As a regional partner, Australia has long been one of the strongest supporters of political and economic reform in Myanmar, and the opportunities this reform provides for the people of the country. It is not just about policies. People matter too. Our people-to-people links are growing. The backbone of these links is the medium-sized community of Myanmar people who live in Australia. Today, we estimate that there are more than 30,000 Myanmar-born people living in Australia. A number of Anglo-Burmese migrated to Australia after Myanmar regained independence, and more came after the coup in 1962. Many of Myanmar's ethnicities have also migrated to Australia. Most people claiming ancestry from Myanmar live in the state of Western Australia, with many Bamar and Karen living there. There is also a large Chin community living in Melbourne, and Canberra, my hometown, has a large Hmong community. An increasing number of Australians come to visit Myanmar as tourists. Last year we estimate around 25,000. And this has been, of course, been made easier in recent years with the introduction of Myanmar's e-visa system. Myanmar's position in ASEAN and its future in the ASEAN economic community is important. Myanmar is richly endowed with agricultural land, minerals, precious gems, oil and gas. But to be brutally honest, Australia and Myanmar don't have a strong trade relationship. We export very little to and import even less from Myanmar. Historically, for both our countries, trade has not been the driving force between our bilateral relationship. Even today, our exports of goods and services are worth only around about 250 million Australian dollars. That's about 200 million American dollars. And our imports are around $80 million, or about 60 million US dollars. Of course, both Australia and Myanmar would like to see bilateral trade grow, and the prospects for that have improved now that Myanmar has eased restrictions on imports and opened up. We're already seeing growth in exports of Australian meat, fresh produce, dairy and wine. Australian investment in Myanmar, however, is a different story. There's actually been a very dramatic increase in Australian investment in Myanmar. ANZ Bank is the only non-Asian bank to be issued a license to operate in Myanmar, and Woodside Energy has made huge investments in exploratory effort towards offshore gas projects. I'll now say a few words about the future. I'm not going to predict the future. It would be a foolish ambassador that sought to do so, certainly publicly. But I will talk about Australia's approach to the bilateral relationship going forward. Our vision for the future is for a prosperous, just and stable Myanmar, at peace internally and at peace with the rest of the world. We contribute to the realization of that vision through our development assistance program, which supports Myanmar's peace process and also supports political, economic and social reform. In 2017-18, so the current financial year, we provided around $84 million of assistance, primarily in the areas of education, agriculture, support to the peace process, support for governance reform, and humanitarian assistance where required. Through our school grants and stipends program, we provide funding to enable free, compulsory education across 43,000 schools in Myanmar. Every year, we fund around 50 students to undertake master's level study in Australia under the Australia Awards Scholarship Program. I believe that's a larger number of scholarships at master's level offered to Myanmar than from any other country. In recent years, there's been an increase in the number of privately funded students coming from Myanmar to study in Australia. Currently, there are over 1,000 self-funded international enrolments in higher education in Australia. The largest area of study being management and commerce, and as well as engineering. As students complete their studies and return to Myanmar, they are welcome to join the vibrant and growing alumni network that the Embassy is very proud to support. We also have a very considerable volunteer program, with extraordinary Australians making a contribution here in Myanmar. Australia has around 35 volunteers at any one time working in Myanmar. They're in Yangon, Mandalay, Naypyidaw, Pa'an, Miet, and working in a range of sectors, including training, emergency room nurses, building the capacity of local NGOs, assisting reform of the justice sector, as well as teaching English. In 2017-18, we provided, in addition to our development assistance program, around $70 million of humanitarian assistance to displaced Muslims in or from Rakhine State, and also to people displaced by conflict in Kachin and Shan states, and in the 9 camps along the Thai-Myanmar border. In 2014, Australia resumed defence engagement with the establishment of a defence attaché in the embassy, and that was our first defence attaché since the early 1960s. The aim of our defence engagement with the re-establishment of the defence attaché is to reinforce the role of a professional defence force in a democracy. It's a relatively small program. It's around $400,000 a year, and it is focused mainly on English language training, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief training, as well as training on peacekeeping issues. we do not provide any training in areas that can possibly be considered as combat related. In the last 2 or 3 years, Australian students have started coming to Myanmar under the New Colombo Plan. Through the New Colombo Plan, Australian students are enrolling for a semester or more of study in the universities of Myanmar, including 2 who are currently enrolled at the moment. The New Colombo Plan also provides funds for Australian university study tours. So these are Australian students coming up to do a tour in Myanmar as part of their studies. And we'll have, the next 2 will be arriving in July, one from Monash University and the other from the Australian National University. We also have a range of many other little programs. I won't go into all of them, but one particularly interesting one relates to the building of cybersecurity awareness. This is an area which Australia has identified a need throughout the region. It's an area of particular vulnerability for many countries that are emerging from a relatively closed society and where internet access wasn't widespread. And so we here in Myanmar are boosting and developing the cyber security awareness, and there's a cartoon series, Cyber Bacon, which you might have seen, which aims to do that. It's of course in Myanmar language. It's been designed and produced in Myanmar, and that has had the support of the Australian government. I should also mention that outside of Myanmar, the Australian National University is the leading university in the world for the teaching of and research on contemporary Myanmar studies. Not only is it one of the very few universities to teach now, it is also indeed one of the very few universities in the world which teaches Myanmar as a language. But it also has a dedicated Myanmar Research Centre, which opened in 2014. The Australian National University also continues to organise and host, as it has for many years, the Myanmar Update Conference, which brings academics from around the world to Canberra to present the findings from their latest research. I think all this two-way exchange is really important. You know, Myanmar is one of the least known and understood countries in Southeast Asia, despite its strategic location at the crossroads of Asia. Decades of self-imposed isolation by military-dominated governments, followed by over a decade of international sanctions, no doubt contributed to this lack of understanding and knowledge. The gap in understanding and knowledge, which is on both sides of the equation, can only be bridged by greater engagement. In March this year, the State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi visited Australia for the Australia-ASEAN Special Summit, and also to undertake a bilateral program as a guest of the Australian government. She was accompanied by the Minister for International Cooperation, U Jo Tin, and the National Security Advisor, U Tong Tin. She previously visited Australia in late 2013. There have been other ministerial level visits in both directions, but I won't mention all of them here tonight. My point is that more contact through trade, investment, education, academic study, and high-level visits are all vitally important. Australia is an outward-looking country, and we will continue to work with Myanmar to promote economic reform and inclusive growth, to reduce poverty and to address inequality. In this way, we will strengthen the bilateral relationship and contribute to Myanmar's stability and prosperity. We want to be, and be seen to be, a leading partner to all Southeast Asian nations, including Myanmar. We want to see Myanmar become a respected and successful neighbour and friend, taking its rightful place in the community of nations. Myanmar's transition to democracy is not complete. Much needs to be done to strengthen the institutions of the state that define and uphold a democratic nation. Much needs to be done to address poverty, inequality, and human rights for all people living in Myanmar. Australia is only one country, but I hope from this talk today, you will see that notwithstanding recent concerning developments in Rakhine State, our approach is based on the firm belief that Myanmar needs more, not less, engagement with the rest of the world. Australia's engagement with Myanmar goes back more than 65 years, and I'm confident that will continue and will grow for many more years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholas Coppel. Now, I would like to welcome questions from the audience. We have 20 minutes for the question and answer section. I would like to request the audience to wait for a volunteer to come and give you the microphone.
I am going to be the new program manager for humanitarian disarmament for Norwegian People's Aid. I was just wondering what your approach would be to the continuing peace process happening in this country, in particular engagement with various actors that are signatories for the NCA. And then as a follow-on question to that, your approach to humanitarian support and assistance in regards to the peace process, particularly for NPA, and mine action, clearance of landmines, and those sorts of issues.
Thank you for that question about Australia's support for the peace process in Myanmar. We provide most of our support to effectively a multi-donor trust fund type arrangement called the Joint Peace Fund. There are 11 countries which have contributed to that fund. The purpose of the fund is not to shape or direct or to influence the peace process, but is to support the peace process. So we support all the parties through assistance in either training or capacity building, their participation in union peace conferences, and also it undertakes some research which can support the process. But we studiously avoid taking sides. We do not provide advice on what should happen. The peace process in Myanmar is one for the people, the government and the ethnic armed organizations to negotiate amongst themselves, Katmador included. And no, we don't believe that, it's, in fact, no one's wanting us to get involved in shaping that or mediating that. It is a domestically driven, it's a process which has the full ownership of the participants in Myanmar. It's a little unusual in that respect from some other peace processes around the world, where often you might have the United Nations or some independent party brokering peace between the parties. But in Myanmar, that isn't the way the peace is being negotiated, and our Australia and the other donors, the Joint Peace Fund, fully respect that. Our humanitarian assistance isn't to support the peace process, but it's to support people who are in humanitarian need. And some of those, of course, are conflict affected, particularly in northern Shan and Kachin State. And I mentioned also assistance to the border camps on the Thai-Myanmar border. But the bulk of humanitarian funding today is towards the Rakhine crisis, where there's far larger needs and greater numbers of people affected. Thank you.
Hello. My question is more ASEAN-based, but I was wondering, in light of the Indonesian President Joko Widodo's comments at the ASEAN Australia Summit in March this year, about how he would fully support Australia's membership into ASEAN, what your thoughts were on this, and if you think this is necessarily a positive, whether there will be challenges to this, or completely reciprocal and beneficial relationship for Australia and the other countries in ASEAN.
Australia should be or a member of ASEAN. I mean, that's not a live topic in Canberra. It's not an issue the Australian government is pursuing. It's not an objective. We want to work with ASEAN. We have established an embassy dedicated to ASEAN, which is based in Jakarta. But I don't think there are any serious proposals for Australia to become a member. I mean, I think it would be very much more for the member states of ASEAN to invite other countries to join as a collective group. And I'm not aware of ASEAN being interested in expanding its membership much beyond its current 10 members. But we do have a very close relationship, a special relationship with ASEAN. The embassy is only one sign of that. And we had a special summit in Sydney where all leaders of ASEAN were invited to Sydney and were in the country at the same time, with the exception of one who had to pull out at the last moment.
Thank you very much for your very interesting talk about Australia and Myanmar. I'm Kim Hong-min from Myanmar Institute of Strategic Studies under the Foreign Ministry. I think I want you to talk about the Australia-Myanmar Institute, AMI, which is headed by former Australian Ambassador to Myanmar, Christopher Lam. And then we are partners, and there are several universities in this institute. So please explain to the audience about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I perhaps should have mentioned that. I mentioned that the Australian National University has a Myanmar Research Centre, but there is also an Australia-Myanmar Institute, which is based in Melbourne and was founded and is led by Chris Lam, who was one of my predecessors here as Australian Ambassador. It has a fairly active program in Australia of organising speeches and talks on Myanmar-related topics. But it has also organised two separate conferences here in Yangon, at the University of Yangon, multidisciplinary conferences, and the range of topics has been very broad, reflecting the academic interests between Australia and Myanmar across the board. So we have Australian archaeologists who have been doing work and research in Myanmar for decades. There have been art historians, there have been forestry experts, agricultural experts, political scientists, historians, economists, quite a wide range. And this Australian Myanmar Institute has very creatively brought together these groups and presented on two separate occasions conferences here in collaboration with MISIS and located at the University of Yangon. So it's another example of that engagement that is taking place between Australia and Myanmar, driven not by government, but through academic and individuals at the people-to-people level. And I think that gives a lot of ballast and strength to our relationship.
Thank you very much for the brief. I'm glad to hear the question on AMI and the mention on cyber banking, the cybersecurity awareness raised in the program here. You mentioned quite a bit of programs the Australian government is doing in Myanmar. And do you have any, well, how do you prioritize it in the coming few years?
The activities, a lot of them are outside of government, so I don't have to personally prioritise them. The work that, or the activities that are taking place through the Myanmar Research Institute and the Australian Myanmar Institute are driven by the individuals involved. The activities of the new Colombo plan, which are academic exchanges and students coming up here, are very much proposals which come forward from the universities themselves. To be sure, they get shortlisted and prioritised for funding from the Australian government. Our priorities are across the board. We are interested in, as I mentioned, political and economic stability. We want to encourage reform in Myanmar. We want to see Myanmar grow and prosper and open up. So a lot of our assistance is in that area. I've mentioned quite a bit about education. In our aid program, education is the centerpiece. We put over half of our development assistance is in education. We really believe education is the key which unlocks the potential of every individual and also unlocks the potential of the nation. No matter what field you are in Myanmar, so often the constraint is the education level and abilities through it from education of the citizens. And if we can strengthen education in Myanmar, then the people of Myanmar will be able to take more control of their lives, better access to health, better access to knowledge and awareness. They'll be able to participate more in business activities, in NGO activities, in media, whatever. But education is the key. But without an education, the people are really constrained. So we like to put the bulk of our development assistance is focused on that. And we do it through the Ministry of Education. We could build schools or pay for teachers here or there, but our money wouldn't go very far. Most of our assistance is together with the Ministry of Education as we try and shape the quality of teacher training, the quality of the curriculum. And if we can help Myanmar move forward on these things, consistent with Myanmar's National Education Strategic Plan, we can use our aid and have it gets leveraged. It can have a much bigger impact than actually building or doing specific things like that. So it's a little bit less visible. I mean, you won't see a bridge or a school with Australian aid on it. But the work we're doing really is important in trying to change the system, which will affect the lives of all students in all states and regions of the country. So, to answer your question, education is our priority, but it's not the only priority.
Can you know more about how, the Australian embassy engages with other countries or embassies in promoting peace or education in Myanmar?
We engage very closely. One of the most important things in development assistance is donor coordination. It's a terrible situation if each country, each embassy was just doing its own thing without realizing what others are doing. So we need to coordinate amongst ourselves, but of course we need to coordinate with the government of Myanmar. And indeed, we would go one step further and say the priorities need to be set by the government of Myanmar. And of course, education is priority of the NLD government. And as I mentioned, we work very closely in supporting the Ministry of Education, providing our support there. But in the area of the peace, as I mentioned, the 11 donors have all come, 11 countries have all come together, and we pool the funding and create a secretariat that assesses independently the proposals to be supported. So we are fully coordinated. On other areas, on inclusive economic growth, there's the LIFT fund, which is a multi-donor trust fund. And most of our assistance is provided together with others in a coordinated fashion. There are many benefits from that. One of which, of course, is that we're not duplicating each other, but it also means you've got greater capacity to make a difference when the pool of funds is much larger. The ability of a larger fund to professionally assess proposals which come forward from communities or individuals is much stronger. The ability of a pooled funding mechanism to do monitoring and evaluation of projects is also much stronger. And so I think it's a good development model for a number of reasons.
Yes, nice to meet you. I'm a student from Genga Education Center. Thank you for your good talk. Yes, my question is, you mentioned about peace and conflict for Shan State, Kachin State, and Rakhine State. So, is the Myanmar government and Australia government cooperation for humanitarian cases from that states? I mean, Kachin, Rakhine, and Shan states. Could you explain more about actions of the two governments between Australia and Myanmar? Yeah.
Humanitarian assistance, particularly in the conflict areas, that we provide that assistance not through the government of Myanmar, but through our international partners, whether it be the International Red Cross, the World Food Programme, other UN agencies. That's a reason for that. One is that's their expertise around the world in many areas of conflict or post-conflict communities. The other reason, of course, is the conflict involves two sides, one of which is the government. So when we're providing assistance to the affected community, it really doesn't make sense to provide it through the government, which is through the Tatmadaws, the other side of the fighting. So it needs to be independent from that.
Hi. Right. Is it working? Hi. I'm Anna from the Red Cross. So obviously you have worked in many different countries, and I'm quite interested on your thoughts on how Australia has played a role in other politically and socio-economically similar countries, not necessarily Southeast Asian. And an example of how these involvements have been emulated in Myanmar that has really shown to give a significant progression to the country, whichever aspect you may.
I'm not sure I fully understood your question, but I'll try to answer it and then come back and have a follow-up question if I haven't addressed it adequately. I mean, each country, of course, is a different relationship and a different set of circumstances. So while we can learn from one to another, it's not a template that can automatically be applied. In my experience, I mean, I've served in 2 countries in ASEAN, and I've also served in 2 of the Pacific Islands, Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands. And my experience in the Pacific Islands is very different from the situation you face here. They're, Solomon Islands, very small communities, often isolated as islands, not connected the way Myanmar is with India and China as major markets on either side. So the development challenges which are experienced in countries like that are very different from the development challenges faced in Myanmar. Myanmar, of course, also has its own legacy of decades of military rule, which has caused a lot of damage to society and the institutions of the country. So there needs to be a lot of rebuilding going on there, rebuilding of the capacity, and rebuilding of independence, rebuilding of confidence and trust. Myanmar also has its own problems in terms of internal conflict with the multiple ethnic armed organizations. Conflicts which have been going on intermittently, to be sure, but been going on for decades. And there too, there are a lot of issues around trust and confidence building, which will take a long time to be overcome. So our approach is very much one of supporting the processes, the people and the government to help find their own solutions to these issues. We don't come with here is the answer, just listen to us. I think a lot of the challenges that Myanmar faces are very unique. They've got a lot of complex history to them and need to be addressed by the people and government of Myanmar.
My name is Wayne Yu, and I'm the founder of Center for Executive Southeast Asia. I have 2 questions, one regarding Myanmar, and that's what do you consider as some of your greatest achievements so far in Myanmar? And second question, it doesn't have to relate to Myanmar, but I wonder what challenging decision you have to take on behalf of your country that appears impossible at that time, but you found a way out of it because of your experience. Thanks.
Big questions. I think the greatest achievement, certainly in the time I've been here 3.5 years, the most exciting achievement for me was to be supporting the Union Election Commission through the 2015 elections, being an observer to those elections, seeing them being conducted in Myanmar, And then most importantly of all, then seeing the transition of power from the previous government to the National League for Democracy. To me, that's the biggest achievement. We played a small part in that. We were providing some training for polling station officials. Again, that was done through an international consortium of countries. But to be a witness to that, I felt I was being a witness to history. That was the most significant thing that I've experienced here in Myanmar. In terms of the second question was in relation to personal challenges that I've faced and how.
It's a challenging decision that you have to take on behalf of the country, and it appears impossible because you have to be a diplomat at the same time, but you find a way out of it.
Well, I think following the developments in Rakhine State, there's been a lot of pressure from around the world, from Australia, from media, from NGOs, to disengage, to step back from Myanmar. And as I mentioned in my talk today, the approach we've taken is quite the opposite. The country needs more engagement, not less. But having to advocate for that and to persist with our policies, to explain them, to build support for them, has probably been the most challenging aspect of my tenure here as Australia's ambassador. I mean, there are different views on how to approach human rights issues, but they touch people in very special ways. They affect people, and certainly don't question the motives or the intentions of those who have a different approach. They are very concerned people with a very strong social conscience. But so too do we, and it's just that we've come with a different solution. And we believe that, as I mentioned, that the people of Myanmar aren't responsible for a lot of the things that are happening in this country, and they're not to be abandoned. And engagement with the government and the people is, for us, that we see as the pathway forward. So it's easy to be critical. It's a lot harder to be constructive.
One of the things I read in the foreign policy white paper is Australia wants to better utilize its diaspora communities within Australia. So do you know what that would look like from a Myanmar context with our 30,000 strong Myanmar community in Australia?
Yes, I think that we're already starting to see it. There are a number of the diaspora, the Myanmar-born people in Australia who have actually returned to Myanmar and are contributing to, usually in the commercial field, but not exclusively so. And so they're making, they're building those connections and linkages and trade between the two countries in a very positive way. And we've also had some come as Australian volunteers. So it's, they've come back to give something back to their original country, if you like, the country of their parents. But I think it's building those people-to-people links. People-to-people links isn't an end in itself. I mean, it's part of that greater understanding, I think, that comes from that. And as I mentioned, there's been, on both sides, I think, in terms of Myanmar's understanding of the rest of the world, quite a deficiency. There's also been a deficiency in the rest of the world in terms of its understanding of Myanmar. And people-to-people links can help overcome that.
I don't know how to use this, I'm just going to speak. I'm Tony from the Myanmar Times. I was wondering, you mentioned that Australia's trade with Myanmar is quite, honestly speaking, weak, and investment is increasing, but there's a lot more room for a greater bilateral trade agreement. And there are things like Woodside investing quite a lot in the next couple of years, but I was wondering if you foresee a bilateral trade agreement with Myanmar happening at some point in the next 10, 15 years, and what the greatest obstacles to establishing one is.
The question is the prospects for an Australia-Myanmar trade agreement to help build the trade. Well, we actually have a trade agreement with Myanmar, but it's through ASEAN. So the trade agreement Australia and New Zealand has is with all the member states of ASEAN. So it's there.
But beyond that, do you see a bilateral trade agreement happening with Myanmar in the next 10 years? Or do you think that has had a sufficiently positive impact on?
I think certainly in terms of talking to the business community, both the Myanmar business community and the Australian business community, there hasn't been any call or requirement for something more than the arrangements we already have under the Australia and ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand free trade agreement.
Because with Australia has one with Singapore and Philippines and a few other countries in that area, it's interesting to know what do you think the biggest benefits are from the ASEAN agreement for Australia?
Well, most of the trade agreements, we have a multilateral trade agreements, obviously through the WTO and the GATT before that. And then there's quite a range of regional trade agreements which are under negotiation or have been concluded, but we have very few bilateral ones. With almost 200 countries in the world, it's difficult to have trade agreements with each of them. There really needs to be particular issues which need to be addressed in a bilateral agreement for it to warrant all the time and the effort and the cost of negotiating them. And there hasn't been a call for that in relation to Myanmar. So I think the prospects for that in the next 10 to 15 years, I'd be surprised to see it.
I think the ASEAN one, sorry to keep asking follow-up questions, but do you think the ASEAN one, what do you think the greatest benefits is for to Australia and Myanmar specifically?
I think the greatest benefit of the free trade agreement with ASEAN is the fact that it is with ASEAN. So what we're seeing with manufacturing these days are production chains which go across borders. You might have one item which is, in the manufacture of a shoe or a suit, for example. One part is done in one country, it's shipped to another, and something else happens there, and then it goes to a third country before it ends up in its final destination. Having a free trade agreement which encompasses all those countries is what makes doing business easy. A network of bilateral agreements would not be as strong as a regional agreement. So the ASEAN agreement is a great strength in terms of boosting trade and investment amongst the ASEAN countries and also with Australia and New Zealand.
I'm one of the Australian alumni, and it's very pleasure meeting you tonight here. And I saw from your this short introduction that you have worked in the people smuggling task force for a while. So I have a question regarding to the recently came out U.S. trafficking in prison report, where Myanmar was downgraded as tier 3, and I'm wondering what's your thoughts on that and your advice as an expert on that issue, for Myanmar. Thank you.
For trafficking. I haven't read the US report, and I also don't want to comment on US government policies and programs. I'm an Australian ambassador, not the American ambassador. But if I could just explain, the People Smuggling Task Force is about promoting regular migration to Australia rather than called irregular migration. Australia is very open to migration from many countries. We've been built through migration. We currently take around 200,000 migrants every year for permanent settlement in Australia. It's been a large feature of post-war growth and prosperity, and that continues. But one thing the government and the people of Australia want is some control over that process. And as we're seeing in Europe and many other countries, people just swarming across borders. When that started to happen in Australia, I mean, not swarming across the borders, but arriving by boats, it started to undermine that support for migration. And so we wanted to preserve the migration program, but wanted also to control it. So that was, the People Smuggling Task Force was concerned with that. It's very different from people trafficking, where people are against their will tricked or deceived or into working or marriage in other countries where they're totally disempowered and lose their rights.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coppel.